Hauling cargo up from the planets was the job of the powerful little chemical rockets. In a month, the tugs would be climbing up from Venus to meet her. But the Star Queen would not be stopping, for there would be no one at the controls. She would continue blindly on her orbit, speeding past Venus at miles a second, and 5 months later, she would be back at the orbit of the Earth, though Earth itself would then be far away. It is surprising how long it takes to do a simple addition when your life depends on the answer. Grant ran down the short column of figures half a dozen times before he finally gave up hope that the total would change. Then he sat doodling nervously on the white plastic of the pilot's desk. "With all possible economies," he said, "we can last about 20 days. That means we'll be 10 days out of Venus when—" His voice trailed off into silence. 10 days didn't sound much, but it might just as well have been 10 years. Grant thought sardonically of all the hack adventure writers who had used just this situation in their stories and radio serials. In these circumstances, according to the carbon copy experts, few of whom had ever gone beyond the moon, there were 3 things that could happen. The popular solution, which had become almost a cliché, was to turn the ship into a glorified greenhouse or a hydroponic farm and let photosynthesis do the rest. Alternatively, one could perform prodigies of chemical or atomic engineering, explained in tedious technical detail, and build an oxygen manufacturing plant which would not only save your life, and of course the heroines, but also make you the owner of fabulously valuable patents. The third solution was the arrival of a convenient spaceship, which happened to be matching your course and velocity exactly. But that was fiction, and things were different in real life. Although the first idea was sound in theory, there wasn't even a packet of grass seed aboard the Star Queen. As for feats of inventive engineering, 2 men, however brilliant and however desperate, were not likely to improve in a few days on the work of scores of great industrial research organizations over a full century. The spaceship that happened to be passing was, almost by definition, impossible. Even if other freighters had been coasting on the same elliptic path, and Grant knew there were none, then by the very laws that governed their movements, they would always keep their original separations. It was not quite impossible that a liner, racing on its hyperbolic orbit, might pass within a few 100,000 kilometers of them, but at a speed so great that it would be as inaccessible as Pluto. "If we threw out the cargo," said McNeil at last, "would we have a chance of changing our orbit?" Grant shook his head. "I'd hoped so," he replied, "but it won't work. We could reach Venus in a week if we wished, but we'd have no fuel for braking, and nothing from the planet could catch us as we went past." "Not even a liner?" "According to Lloyd's Register, Venus has only a couple of freighters at the moment. In any case, it would be a practically impossible maneuver. Even if it could match our speed, how would the rescue ship get back? It would need about 50 kilometers a second for the whole job." "Well, if we can't figure a way out," said McNeil, "maybe someone on Venus can. We'd better talk to them." "Well, I'm going to," Grant replied, "as soon as I've decided what to say. Go and get a transmitter aligned, will you?" He watched McNeil as he floated out of the room. The engineer was probably going to give trouble in the days that lay ahead. Until now, they had got on well enough. But like most stout men, McNeil was good-natured and easy-going. But now Grant realized that he lacked fiber. He had become flabby, physically and mentally, living too long in space. A buzzer sounded on the transmitter switchboard. The parabolic mirror on the hull was aimed at a gleaming arc lamp of Venus, only 10 million kilometers away and moving on an almost parallel path. The 3-millimeter waves from the ship's transmitter would make the trip in little more than half a minute. There was bitterness in the knowledge that they were only 30 seconds from safety. The automatic monitor on Venus gave its impersonal go-ahead signal, and Grant began to talk steadily, and he hoped quite dispassionately. He gave a careful analysis of the situation and ended with a request for advice. His fears concerning McNeil he left unspoken. For one thing, he knew that the engineer would be monitoring him at the transmitter. As yet, no one on Venus would have heard the message, even though the transmission time lag was over. It would still be coiled up in the recorder spools, but in a few minutes, an unsuspecting signal officer would arrive to play it over. He would have no idea of how the bombshell that was about to burst, triggering trains of sympathetic ripples on all the inhabited worlds as television and news sheet took up the refrain. An accident in space has a dramatic quality that crowds all other items from the headlines. Until now, Grant had been too preoccupied with his own safety to give much thought to the cargo in his charge. A sea captain of ancient times, whose first thought was for his ship, might have been shocked by this attitude. Grant, however, had reason on his side. The Star Queen could never founder, could never run upon uncharted rocks or pass silently, as so many ships have passed, forever from the knowledge of man. She was safe, whatever might befall her crew. If she was undisturbed, she would continue to retrace her orbit with such precision that men might set their calendars by her for centuries to come. The cargo, Grant suddenly remembered, was insured for over $20 million. There were not many goods valuable enough to be shipped from world to world, and most of the crates in the hold were worth more than their weight, or rather their mass, in gold. Perhaps some items might be useful in this emergency, and Grant went to the safe to find the loading schedule. He was sorting the thin, tough sheets when McNeil came back into the cabin. "I've been reducing the air pressure," he said. "The hull shows some leaks that wouldn't have mattered in the usual way." Grant nodded absently as he passed a bundle of sheets over to McNeil. "Here's our loading schedule. I suggest we both run through it in case there's anything in the cargo that might help." If it did nothing else, he might have added, it would at least give them something to occupy their minds. As he ran down the long columns of numbered items, a complete cross-section of interplanetary commerce, Grant found himself wondering what lay behind these inanimate symbols. Item 347, one book, 4 kilos gross. He whistled as he noticed it was a starred item, insured for $100,000. And he suddenly remembered hearing on the radio that the Hesperian Museum had just bought a first edition 7 Pillars of Wisdom. A few sheets later was a very contrasting item. Miscellaneous books, 25 kilos, no intrinsic value. It had cost a small fortune to ship those books to Venus, yet they were of no intrinsic value. Grant let his imagination loose on the problem. Perhaps someone who was leaving Earth forever was taking with him to a new world his most cherished treasures, the dozen or so volumes that, above all others, had most shaped his mind. Item 564, 12 reels film. That, of course, would be the Neronian super-epic, While Rome Burns, which had left Earth just one jump ahead of the censor. Venus was waiting for it with considerable impatience. Medical supplies, 50 kilos. Case of cigars, 1 kilo. Precision instruments, 75 kilos. So the list went on. Each item was something rare or something which the industry and science of a younger civilization could not yet produce. The cargo was sharply divided into 2 classes, blatant luxury or sheer necessity. There was little in between. And there was nothing at all, which gave Grant the slightest hope. He did not see how it could have been otherwise, but that did not prevent him from feeling a quite unreasonable disappointment. The reply from Venus, when it came at last, took nearly an hour to run through the recorder. It was a questionnaire so detailed that Grant wondered morosely if he'd live long enough to answer it. Most of the queries were technical ones concerning the ship. The experts on 2 planets were pooling their brains in the attempt to save the Star Queen and her cargo.